The office tagline is "History is our playground," and we take it very, very seriously. We do a lot of research. We have historical advisors on staff. We try as much as possible to put anything that's objective, so a costume or a building or an event, to have it play out as accurately as possible. But obviously it's really just a background for our story. It's the backdrop that we set our game inside, so we build a fictional narrative that runs through it. So we try to say all of the historical people and events are recreated as they are in a history book or in a documentary, but you, the assassin, are this sort of vein of fiction, this made-up story running through the middle.
We started in the time before the revolution and went into a couple of years after its conclusion so that we had a wide space to play in. We tried to choose moments that were familiar to people, that would resonate, and then a couple of moments that might be new to them, so that we have this balance of something where players can say, oh, you know, I've learned about this, I've read about this, it's really kind of neat to see it from this perspective, and then other events that may not be as familiar, where they can feel like, oh, I'm learning something new, I'm being exposed to some interesting new historical information, new experiences.
All of our targets in any Assassin's Creed game actually have been real historical people. They always die at the right time, or the right year at least, in the right place, but how they die obviously is up to the player.
When I first came on the project, it was about 2.5 years ago, and right at the beginning, and that was kind of my first job, was to like just start collecting information and see who was around, who these people were, what they were doing, trying to find events that might be, you know, pertinent to an Assassins versus Templar story. For us on the writing team, it was all about language and people and events and kind of the chronology of things and the motivations behind a lot of these men and what they were doing and the reasons for the events that they were involved in. Surprisingly, a lot of them weren't quite as noble as you might think they were. A lot of people, men, particularly in the colonial army, were fighting because it was something to do. They didn't really have a dog in the fight. They didn't really know what it was about, but they were promised 3 square meals a day and to see the colonies, and that was better than, you know, working on the farm.
In terms of dialogue for historical characters, if we stuck 100% to how people spoke and behaved back then, cutscenes would go on forever, and people would probably have difficulty in certain cases following what characters were saying.
Ah, bollocks! We're coming in!
We have several dictionaries that were written around the time of slang and what they call the vulgar tongue, so we were able to work in certain things that are a little bit more casual, a little bit more period specific. It might sound like gibberish to a lot of people because these are phrases that have definitely fallen out of favor.
3 pence a pound is hardly burthensome.
Choosing the cities in the game was a matter of answering multiple prerequisites. People were hoping for different events to happen in the game. For instance, the Boston Massacre was a must, but also the team wanted to have different events that we would bring back to light that people wouldn't know as much, and some of the events that also would fit more into our fantasy. The first time the player will get to Boston is eventually through the Long Wharf. It was something that we really wanted to do from the beginning. It feels like that's how you enter the New World if you come from Europe. A couple hills that were there back then. Fort Hill over here, the Common on top on the North Ward, and then Tremont, which were the 3 hills that were in Boston. This place is still called Tremont today because of the 3 mountains over there. Most popular was certainly Beacon Hill because people would use the beacon as a warning in case of any attacks. Unfortunately, had to cut some parts. One was Philadelphia. Actually, there are still parts we'll use in the game, but the city as a whole was a bit problematic. Landmarks were cool, but not sufficient to make this city really interesting as a gameplay purpose. And also technically, the fact that it was a grid, that like streets were really linear, it was really hard for the loading, so we had to cut it off.
I think in terms of tone, all of the colonial cities we built are much more wooden than previous Assassin's Creed cities, which were often stone. The steepled roofs have a big impact on free running. There's a lot more nature in the cities than ever before, so there's often trees and larger squares. The streets themselves are wider.
For the first time in the series, we have a lot of slopes, like in the Frontier as well, but on the roofs there's a lot of slopes there. So that really meant that you could get into fights on rooftops that were really steep slopes. We had to spend a long time in the fight system, in just general navigation, like every single step the assassin takes, he has to place it correctly. We take a lot of the moves that we created for Frontier, because obviously that was the one that really pushed us most, and we bring it back into the cities as well. So you can do a lot of these cool things, but the one favourite that we do have is the ability to run through buildings. We call it the pass-through because we've added moves called the pass-over, so now you can jump over things, you can slide underneath things, and you can run through buildings as well. And it's really cinematic, and it feels pretty awesome. It's over in a flash, but it's a great way of getting past people. And you'll have like a woman in the window, and she gets scared as you run past, and it's pretty cool.
One of the scary things in moving to America from Europe was we had to rebuild all of our civilian population. These are characters that players often don't look at in great detail, but there are hundreds of them and many different flavors of them. You really need them to fill out your city locations. And we wanted to give them more specificity, more things to do, so our civilians can start and stop actions. Some of them are people who can give you missions you could come across. We wanted the civilians themselves to be sources of content.
Leave the tea to rot aboard those foul ships!
When history delivers something in the period we're dealing with, we can't really ignore it. And we knew that guns had become much more present in the American Revolution than they were in previous Assassin's Creed settings.
Picture being on a battlefield. When you pull the trigger on one of these bad boys, it would smoke like you wouldn't believe. So the smoke on the field was insane. Even the recreations today where they fire black powder, they only use a quarter to a half what they actually use, so the smoke isn't even really what it really was. So anyway, you're sitting there, the guys are marching at you, you're nervous, you're scared, your gun's searing hot because you've shot it already a few times. You gotta half cock it, you gotta put some, reach in your pocket, put some black powder in here, put this back, and you gotta go down here, you gotta drop your wadding in, then drop your ball, then drop some more black powder, and you gotta pull this thing out. Meanwhile, there's guys probably shooting at you. You gotta flip it over. You gotta stuff it like this. You gotta pull that out. This is searing hot, so your hand's burning because you already shot your gun a few times. So you're probably holding it here. You gotta jam this back down, and you gotta pick it up, see through all the smoke who you're gonna shoot at, aim, and then turn your head, because when you pull the trigger, this blows up and would burn your face. You gotta aim, then turn your head away and shoot. These guns have no rifling and you're shooting a little ball, so they're already really, really inaccurate, and they're very heavy and your hands are burnt and it's the madhouse. So, I mean, just imagine how inaccurate they actually would be. And when people talk about, you know, there was guns in those periods, it's so stupid the assassin couldn't get to them, just think of all of that when you think about what it took to shoot one of these things. And it's really easy to get to somebody in that time and take them out with a knife or a sword.
When we started thinking about the American Revolution as a setting, we realized the battles that happened, the events inside of the cities, the events in the frontier, those were all obviously critical to the revolution and exactly what we wanted to create inside of our game. But when we opened up the history books a little bit more deeply, you know, it became apparent really quickly the revolution would not have succeeded without navies. The British Navy was critical in their dominance in the empire that they created. We knew we had to go there. We had to try it, at least as a prototype, to see if we could get something going. Pretty quickly we were convinced that this was going to be something awesome, so we just staffed up a full-on team in Singapore to focus on this. As we went forwards, every iteration that we saw just got better and better. We developed this tech where you can go from a calm, glassy sea to absolutely huge raging storms, massive waves all over the place dynamically, like on the fly. When we saw that we were going to have these kinds of potentials, we knew it was going to be absolutely huge for us.
I have worked on games in the past where there was quite a bit of direction change, and this time there was almost none. We've really stuck to the initial vision. What we're delivering is pretty much exactly what we set out to deliver.
It's a long development cycle. You know, the joke, a lot of us who've been on it 3 years, we could have become veterinarians if, you know, in the same amount of time, and instead we made this game. And it's a huge chunk of your working life to put into something.
3 years ago, I couldn't imagine working on a game the size of this. It has depth and detail in so many different ways, from the microcosmic view of the homestead where you see what it's like to be a lumberjack in the American Revolution, to the sweeping, huge naval battles that you'll be inside of, and the cities where you'll see a whole new set of life, to the frontier where you'll be climbing on cliffs and running through the trees and watching wolves eating deer. To have the honor and privilege to work on this kind of thing, for me, it's just spectacular.